Well, thank you very much for joining me in this video. I want to talk to you today about a situation where you've got a firm deal, it comes up to closing, and you get notification that the buyer is either unwilling or unable to close. Nobody likes that situation, but it does happen from time to time, and it's most likely to happen in a market where the prices are falling. And of course, that's what we've had more often than not ever since 2022. What happens often is comes time to close, it's a firm deal, but the buyer needs financing, gets an appraisal, and the property no longer appraises. Well, that means he's got to come up with more cash to close the deal. He doesn't have the cash, he can't close. Or he may have been hearing stories about the falling market, afraid it's going to fall a lot more, and figures he's better to cut his losses, and he's just refusing to close. Either way, you've got a situation where you receive notice that the buyer is intending not to close. In the REM magazine recently, there were two articles about this situation. The first one involved a condo in Toronto, and the second involved an upper price home in Mississauga. First of all, the condo. No surprise here. Condos have really been hit harder than any other segment of the marketplace, and Toronto more so for the condo market than anywhere else in Canada. Of course, there's a reason for that. When the properties are really appreciating in value, as they were up until 2022, from 2017 and certainly 19, 20, 21, and into early 2022, you've got all kinds of speculators who want to jump into the marketplace and cash in on the appreciation. And the easiest property to jump in on is a condo, because they can often buy it quite a ways in advance. Many times the developer's putting it up for sale before even a shovel's in the ground. And also, if he closes on it, he can rent it out. He doesn't have to worry about snow shoveling, or he doesn't have to worry about cutting the lawn or any of these maintenance issues. And even if he rents it at a loss, that helps carry the cost until he's ready to sell it. So you had all kinds of people lined up to buy condos, all kinds of developers lined up to develop condos, and that's in the early 2019, 2020, and so on. Then the market hits a brick wall, and all of a sudden, the condos start to fall in price, and they fell in price more than the other. Well, we've seen the general market from the peak fall almost 30%, condos more so. So this particular one, the chap was buying the condo, it was around $650,000, and the developer builder had required 20% down payment. So he had $130,000 as a deposit. He decided that he could not or would not close and notified the developer. The developer, of course, was going to get the deposit. He signed it over rather than go to court, and the developer was still vacillating when I read the article as to whether he was going to sue him for damages in addition to the deposit. So that's the situation, and you got that with condos and people on the fence trying to decide what to do. They got a lot of money at stake, closings coming up, and the bottoms dropped out of the market. But the second one involves an upper-end home in Mississauga. It was sold in May of 2023, so it was a year of falling prices already, and it sold for $8,385,000, so it was quite a house. And because there's a lot of money involved in the deposit, and it became apparent that the buyer was having problems putting the deal together. So he had already agreed on the offer for a subsequent deposit in June, which he paid. He requested an extension. They granted the extension, but they required another deposit. Then he came back to the table with another request for an extension, a further deposit, right up until October, and he wasn't able to close. So he let them know, gave them notice that he was unable to close. What the seller did was put it on the market and eventually sold it, but he sold it for $6,550,000. That's a loss of $1,835,000. So the seller sued the buyer for his losses, damages of $1,835,000 and carrying costs of $550,000 by the time it closed. The buyer didn't challenge the $550,000 carrying cost, but what he said, and this was his defense, and it's a term I want you to use, we've used it before in the past, The buyer said he didn't believe the seller tried to mitigate damages. Mitigating damages mean you use your best effort to try and limit the amount of damages the other party's going to suffer. And he said, I don't believe the seller did that. And so the seller said, well, here's what I did. 2 weeks after the deal failed to close, I put it back on the market. I put it on the market, MLS, at the original purchase price. But I watched the market very carefully. 2 weeks later, I lowered it, and I continued to lower it as the market slid. I not only had it on MLS, not only had it on social media, but we advertised it in magazines in the area, and we targeted our target audience of who the potential buyer would be. We did the best we could to try and get the most money we could, and that's the best we could do. The judge said that he felt the buyer failed to prove that the seller didn't mitigate damages. And it's a very difficult thing for a buyer to prove. The judge said you didn't even order an appraisal to try and back up your argument. So the result in court was the seller was awarded $1,835,000 as direct damages. That's a dollar difference between the original offer and the ultimate sale price. Also, he was awarded the $550,000 carrying cost, and he was awarded $20,693.85 legal costs. So the buyer who walked away from the deal ended up on the hook for well over $2 million. The thing I want to leave with you is this business about mitigating damages. When you get notice, if you're representing a seller and you get notice that the buyer is unwilling or unable to close, the first thing you need to do, and now courts do this, I understand, as a final decision, but you need to decide who's in breach. If the seller's in breach, in other words, there's a cloud on title or the seller didn't do something he was supposed to do, well, then there's no use going after the buyer if the seller's the cause of the problem. But if the buyer's in breach, he just flat out, he had an unconditional offer, maybe he needed financing, the prices are dropping, he's not going to get it to appraise what it needs to be, but he didn't win subject to financing. And so now he's got a problem he can't solve, can't meet the deadline and so on. So you need, as soon as you know that, to send a letter to the buyer notifying him, give him 2 days, 3 days, whatever, a deadline, especially if it's something like a further deposit or even a deposit hasn't come in. It's very difficult to prove damages after 3 or 4 days, but if a deposit hasn't come in, didn't kill the deal, just meant that the buyer's already in breach. So you send them notice and you tell them that if it isn't, the problem isn't rectified within 2 days or 3 days or closed within such and such time, you're putting the property back on the market for sale in an attempt, and then use the terms to mitigate damages. Let them know that. Then you list the property for sale and you document your efforts. You document because you want to prove whatever goes to court, you've done your best to get the most price you can, both for the seller and also for the buyer who's going to be on the hook for the shortfall. And the financial remedies that you can get, automatically the deposit. You go to court, you're going to get the deposit. The deposit is a token of good faith, and if the buyer's not acting in good faith, he's going to forfeit the deposit. You can't just give it out of your trust account. You got to get a court order or a mutual release from the two parties, but he's going to forfeit the deposit. Also, if you can demonstrate that the market has slid and the property now isn't worth what it was worth when he put in the offer, you're going to be awarded damages, and then you should be able to get some legal costs too. Now the problem is a practical issue. See, when you're dealing with a $6 million, $7 million, $8 million sale, there's a lot of money at stake. If you're dealing with a $500,000 or $600,000 sale, and the amount of money after the deposit is somewhat minimal, you may spend more than that in legal battles in court, and it isn't worth your while. So the seller has to decide what he's going to do, whether he's going to go to court or not. He's going to rely on your expertise there. As I said, it's not something that you want to have happen, but especially in a market where prices are falling, it will happen from time to time, and you need to do your best to notify your seller, work with them, and make sure you mitigate damages. Thank you very much for joining this video. Talk to you again next week.